welcome again. Well, that some people call a quiche, some people call it a tart, and some call it a flan. But whatever you call it, what's around the edge and underneath is pastry. And it's pastry that today's programme is all about. But before I make any pastry, I've just got a word for beginners, and that is ignore all the old wives' tales. If you have problems making pastry, the best advice I can give you is to really follow the rules. And never mind if Great Aunt Alice has the most delicious pastry and breaks all the rules. If you've had problems, then you follow them. Now, first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about ingredients, and there's a lot of controversy about what sort of fat you should use. So I did a little experiment in my kitchen, and I'll just pass on the results. Now, I found, first of all, I made a pastry with all margarine, and it had quite a good texture, but a very pronounced margarine flavour, so that's not top of the list. Next, I made a pastry with all butter. Now, that has a good flavour, but it is a little bit rich if you've got rich fillings in the pastry, so I prefer not to use butter. And I found butter a little bit difficult to roll out as well. Now, here's all lard. I think there's a good case for making all lard pastry, especially for a savoury recipe. It gives a nice savoury flavour, and that's good for Cornish pasties. But use pure lard and not whipped up vegetable fat, which does have rather a peculiar flavour sometimes. Next on the list is half lard and half butter, and that gives fairly good results, but top of my list is the one I've always used. That's the one my mother taught me to use, half margarine and half lard, and I found the combination of those two together give the right texture and the right flavour. But it's up to you really which flavour and texture you prefer, so you can experiment yourself. Now, before I make any pastry, I'd just like to have a word with you about coolness. Now, this is something that upsets a lot of people because they think they can't make pastry if they haven't got a marble slab. Well, a marble slab at room temperature is the same as a working surface or a wood surface at room temperature. So unless you've got somewhere really cold to keep your marble slab, it's not much good to you. But it is important that things should be kept cool. And I've got a very warm kitchen, so if you have, take a tip from me and try and make the pastry near an open window. This helps to keep everything cool. Now, the reason things shouldn't be too warm is, as you can see in the diagram here, you want the grains of flour and the pieces of fat to stay separate whilst you're rubbing them in. Now, if your hands and the room are too warm, the fat will start to melt. And if it coats too much of the flour, then the dough can't absorb enough water to give a good texture to the finished pastry. Well, that's the fat sorted out, cool fat if possible. Next, I want to talk about flour, because that's the next most important ingredient. And we're going to make short crust, which is the basic everyday, the sort of short crust that you have round an apple pie. And I've got 4 ounces of flour weighed out here, and the first thing I'm going to do is sift it into the bowl through a sieve. And the reason I'm sifting it is because there is another important ingredient, which I haven't mentioned yet, and that's air. You need to have air in pastry. So if you put the flour through a sieve like this, it gives it a nice airing as it goes down into the bowl. So keep the sieve lifted fairly high above the bowl. And no need to bother with a special flour sieve. An ordinary big sieve like this will do. Also, it saves you money because super sifted flour in the shops costs more money than ordinary flour, so if you sift it yourself, you can even save some money. Right, so the flour's in the bowl. I'm going to add a pinch of salt because this is for a quiche and it's a savoury pastry. I don't always bother if it's for something sweet. Now, I've got my 1 ounce of lard and 1 ounce of fat, margarine, ready here. And that's cut into little pieces. And now I'm going to rub these into the flour. It's talked about, oh, you know, I can't make pastry because I'm heavy-handed. Well, there's no such thing as anyone born heavy-handed. Everybody's born with the same sort of hands. It's how you control them. And how to be light-handed is really to be gentle, so that you lift up the pieces of fat, let them run through your fingers, and be gentle with them. It's the brain that controls the hands. Nobody's born with leaden hands. So just let them come up, the pieces of fat. Lift your hands up, because this is what will get more air in as well. And just be light. If you're in a sort of, hurry, or you're in a bad mood, you might be tempted to go like this and sort of, bash it about a bit. But Gentleness is the word. So if you keep saying gentle in your mind, you won't go wrong. What you want to end up with is a crumbly mixture. But don't worry if the mixture isn't very even. As long as you've rubbed the fat into the flour, it doesn't matter if you have a few lumps that are a little bit uneven. That won't matter at all. And it's better to have that than to overwork it and get too much warmth in. Now, the mixture's ready for the next ingredient, which is water. Now, it's impossible to be exact about the amount of water you need because different flour absorbs different water. But for 4 ounces, I'll start off with 2 tablespoons of water. And I'm starting off with a knife because that saves handling it. The less you handle it, the better, because again of the warmth. Now, that's not enough, so I'm going to add another tablespoon. Carry on mixing with my knife. And then at this stage, you can get rid of the knife and start to feel whether it's moist enough by using your hands. And again, gentle. Just bring the mixture together. And more water's needed there. I can feel that now. If you add too much water, the pastry will be too hard when it's baked. And if you add too little, it'll be dry and not easy to roll out. So when you're adding the last bit of water, be careful. Now what you want to end up with is really what we've got here now. This doesn't need any more, and that's a bowl that hasn't got any loose pieces of flour in it, and the pastry looks fairly moist and has quite a good texture, a soft texture. Now, the next very important point, which I want to really impress on you, is that pastry should be rested before it's rolled out. And the reason is we spoke about gluten on the bread programme. And the gluten, if you remember, when it comes in contact with moisture, starts to become elastic. So if you let this happen to pastry, it'll be much easier to roll out and it won't shrink. So you pop it in a polythene bag, put it in the fridge and leave it for about 20 to 25 minutes to rest before you roll it out. Well, I've got some rested pastry here that was made about half an hour ago, and I'm now going to show you the difference. Now, this bit here is fairly sort of elasticy and pliable and smooth because the gluten has started to work, whereas this bit that I've just made is a bit flabby and a little bit sort of, if you rolled that out now, it would be soft and it would crack and it would be hard to do. So I hope you can see the real difference there. This one is pliable and this one would be very difficult to roll out. I know it's a bore, we're all in a hurry, we all want to get things done quickly, but I think it takes more time in the long run if you don't rest the pastry. I do think that's very important. Well, the next bit is rolling out, and use a flat surface. Doesn't have to be a pastry board, a working top like this is all right. And this is a good bit of pastry equipment, a flour dredger, because it means that you can sprinkle the flour over evenly before you start to roll the pastry. And also you can sprinkle your rolling pin. Quick word about rolling pins. There are lots of very gimmicky ones on the market, but I think the best sort of rolling pin to have is a straight one without handles and a good length, which gives you more control. Now, the way to roll pastry out is to place the rolling pin on the dough and then keep your hands flat at each end and just roll very gently backwards and forwards. And we want to make this a round shape because of the quiche we're going to make, so give it a quarter turn, keeping the pressure even and just giving a little bit more flour if you feel it getting sticky underneath. Don't turn the pastry over though while you're rolling it. Always leave the floured surface down, and that's the bit that goes down into the tin afterwards. So another quarter turn. And just try and keep your hands at each end as even as you can. And I hope you'll agree with me how easy this little piece of dough here is to roll out, and that's because it's been rested. It's very tempting to go like that when you're rolling, but that gives you far less control, so just give the pastry a turn rather than the rolling pin. Then pick up your tin and see if you've got the right size. Yes, that size looks all right there. This is an 8-inch quiche tin, and 4 ounces of flour pastry is just right to line an 8-inch quiche tin. And I would like to say one thing, another very important thing. There are so many important things, but this one is another very important one, and that is always bake pastry in a metal container because it conducts the heat much better than either glass or porcelain, however pretty they are. And also grease the tin to make it easy to come out. It's got a loose base, that, but it's been very thoroughly greased. Now, the way to line the tin is to take the edge of the pastry and wrap it over the rolling pin. So you roll it all round the rolling pin like that. Then you slide your tin into the centre and then put the tip over the edge of the tin and then just unroll it. That's quite an easy operation. Now, the thing to remember here is it's very tempting now to start smoothing it out and stretching it, and that's the thing you don't want to do. What you want to do is ease it in and not stretch it out. So when you're putting the pastry in, just ease it down. And because pastry is likely to shrink a little bit in the oven, it's important that you get good, strong walls. I always like to think of this bit as sort of building a wall and reinforcing a wall. Just push it down like that and make a nice, strong, sturdy wall. Now, if you find that you've got a little bit of wall, as I have on this side here, which isn't quite as thick as the others, take a piece of pastry off where you've got a thick bit and just press that in and reinforce it. You can do all these little tricks. It doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to know. And what you're really aiming at is good, sturdy walls. Now, I haven't wasted any pastry there, and I often just leave a little bit sticking up at the edge, just to allow for shrinkage. But if you want to be a perfectionist and you want to have very neat edges, then you can just take a knife and just slide the knife round like that, which means that you'll have neater edges, but you'll also have little bits of pastry left over, so I never really bother with that. That's all that's needed. Press the base over because you want all the air out from underneath. It's air trapped underneath that causes pastry to rise up whilst it's cooking. And then, just to make sure you haven't got any air trapped, or if you have, to let it out, prick the base. And don't worry when you're pricking it that the filling will fall through, because the pricks will seize up. Now, this is going to be baked, what's called baked blind. Sometimes that's confusing for beginners, but baking blind means that you're going to bake it in the oven without any filling in it before the filling goes in, to get the pastry nice and crisp before the filling goes in, because we want to have a crisp edge. That's what we're aiming at. And the thing to do is to place that on another very important piece of kitchen equipment, and that is this. Have one of these, a nice solid baking sheet in the oven. Put this on it, because this is a good conductor of heat as well. You've got a nice solid baking sheet which will be very hot, and that'll cook the base so it's very crisp underneath. A lot of people are always asking me, how can I get the underneath of my flans crisp? Well, that's one of the ways. Then you put that in the oven, and provided you've lined it carefully and pricked it, you don't need greaseproof paper or baking beans or any of those things that cause extra bother. And if you find it starts to rise up a little bit, have a look halfway through and just sort of slap it down again or prick it again with a fork. It'll be perfectly all right. Now, give that 15 minutes in the oven. That's at gas mark 4, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And then take it out, and as an extra precaution, I've got one here to show you, that's been pre-baked. As an extra precaution, just paint over the pastry shell with beaten egg. And what that does is it sort of gives it an extra crispness, because you put it back in the oven, for another 5 minutes, and then when it comes out, it really is lovely and crisp and firm before the filling goes in. And that's, again, what we're aiming at. Now, we're going to make the classic quiche Lorraine, which is from the Alsace-Lorraine area of France, or literally a cream and bacon flan. And here I've got 2 eggs beaten up in 1/2 half a pint of double cream. If you want to be a bit more economical, you can use milk, but double cream does really give a lovely flavour. And the bacon I've just cooked a little bit until the fat ran out. So now I'm going to pour the filling in, half a pint of double cream, 2 eggs. I've got some freshly milled pepper and a little salt, but not too much salt because of the bacon. Another tip is, before you put that in the oven, leave a little bit in the base of the jug. Carry it to the oven and then put that little bit in at the last minute, because if you put it all in straight away, you may find that it'll spill on the way to the oven. So that's another little tip. Now that'll cook in 35 to 40 minutes and look like the one we took out at the beginning of the programme. Well, once you've mastered the art of short crust pastry, you shouldn't really have many problems, and you can move on to something a little bit more special, which is flaky pastry. Now that used to be an awful lot of bother at one time, but now there's a lovely, quick way of doing flaky pastry. And I'm delighted to be able to show you that, because the old traditional way of making flaky pastry was an awful lot of work, and this is incredibly easy. Now here I've got sifted 6 ounces of plain flour, and when you're making flaky pastry you need a larger quantity of fat. It's half fat to flour with short crust, but with flaky you use a bit more. So I've got 6 ounces of flour, and this is 4 ounces of margarine. Now this margarine has been put into the freezing compartment of the refrigerator for half an hour so that it's nice and hard. And the reason I want it hard is because what I'm going to do is grate this down into the flour. Dip the piece of fat into the flour first, and then just grate it on the coarse edge of a grater down into the flour. Keep dipping it in, and I've got a piece of foil wrapped around it because when you start off, it's good to hold it with foil, otherwise your hands can start to melt it. Make sure you don't get any foil in the pastry like I nearly did there. So carry on, dipping it down until it's all grated in. And then the next thing you want to do is, you've got a heap of grated margarine. You want to separate that out now. So take a palette knife, and that's a nice bendy knife, which is very useful in the kitchen, a palette knife, and just flick those bits of fat round and round until you coat them all with flour. And you can see they separate up quite well as you stir them around with the palette knife. So that's the flour and the lumps of grated fat, fairly well coated. And you can be a bit more bold with the water on this one, because it does actually take a lot more water than short crust. So we'll start off with 3 tablespoons. Carry on with the palette knife. And that'll need quite a bit more water. And now I'm going to finish that off with my hands, again, like I did in the other pastry. And that's still not nearly enough water, so be a bit more bold there. And bring it together. The nice thing about this pastry is that when it's cooked, it's incredibly crisp and crunchy. It's just the right thing for sausage rolls. Now that just needs a spot more water there, just to clean off the bowl a bit. And again, it's very, very important to rest this pastry, because just for the same reasons as before. But when you have rested it and come to roll it out, you'll find that it's a very well-behaved pastry, incredibly easy to roll out, incredibly easy to cook, and in fact, incredibly easy. Well, once you've mastered the art of quick, flaky pastry, which I think you'll agree is really quicker than going out to the shop and buying it, you'll be able to make all sorts of lovely things besides sausage rolls. And one of the nice things I've got in the oven here for you to have a look at. It's something rather special. And this is something which is called beurre en croûte, or a beef fillet wrapped in pastry. And it's a piece of fillet of beef, and it's been wrapped in a pastry case made with quick, flaky pastry, cooked a little bit first in the oven for about 40 minutes and then cooked in the pastry. And I'm going to cut a piece out now so that you can see what it looks like inside. Inside it's also got, besides that beautiful juicy piece of beef, a rather nice mushroom stuffing, which is all around the edges here, a really nice concentrated mushroom stuffing. Well, that would be very good for a dinner party or some sort of special occasion, and nice with some homemade gravy to go with it. Well, the recipe for that, as well as lots of other pastry recipes, is included in the book that goes with the series. I've written down a recipe there for suet crust pastry, which is very nice for a steak and kidney pie, and also how to make whole wheat pastry, because that's really nice, something like a treacle tart. Well, that's all about pastry. I hope you'll come back and join me next time, because we'll be talking all about fish then. So, bye-bye.